All right. Welcome back to the March for Unity, Civility, and Political Engagement, where we build better bridges between communities through listening, learning, and sympathizing. I'm Simmy Hundal, and we are in our fourth episode of the 2022 season. Our program has moved away from producing a live program, instead focusing on the quality of content, on recordings posted to podcast platforms, YouTube, and Facebook. However, we've stayed consistent with trying to tackle some of the largest issues of our day. I've asked our marchers, what do you want to see? And they responded resoundingly that they wanted to have the hard conversation about gun violence in America. As one respondent asked, how can we mobilize to stop this madness? I can't think of many better people to speak to this than our special guest today, Jane Kelso Winter. Jane, can you please introduce yourself and welcome to the program?
Thank you, Simmy. Thanks so much for having me and welcome to your listeners. I'm not surprised that a lot of your listeners asked for this topic because we've seen a huge increase in people. I mean, just myself personally, have seen a lot of people, wondering what they can do. I am actually a long-time volunteer in the gun violence prevention movement. I should back that up because I'm now a volunteer, but I used to work, just a moment. I need to tell somebody downstairs to please not do the dishes.
You're fine.
This is what volunteers do. They're at home, their dogs bark, the dishes are getting done, things are getting banged around from a very helpful husband who is cleaning up while I do this work, but doesn't realize that things get translated to upstairs on audio. Anyway, so sorry for that little aside there, but when I lived in DC for about 11 years, I worked with the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. And I was a paid staff person, and we did grassroots organizing around this issue. And so, we got some major pieces of legislation passed. We got the Brady bill, which was the waiting period on and that was the basis for the national instant criminal records check that we have now. It was originally a waiting period for like a cooling off period while they could do the background check system. And then it progressed into, it's more instant now because of technology improvements, which is a little bit almost too bad because now we don't have the waiting period part of it. But anyway, I worked on that for 11 years. And then when I got to Texas, I thought, whoa, this is what people out in the field have been up against. This is what they're doing. So I took a little bit of a hiatus and, worked on other issues. And then I think it was when we had Sandy Hook, I thought, okay, I need to get back into doing this at the local level. I had been marginally involved with the Texans Against Gun Violence also. And so I jumped back into this movement with Moms Demand Action because I feel like they're the boots on the ground. I was asking some of my friends who had worked with Brady, who do you hear that are really working out in the field? And then, I just have to pause and take a deep breath because I'm going to share my personal story with you, is that when I worked in Brady in DC, it was a time where I thought this was a super important issue, but it wasn't super personal to me. I listened to people calling all day talking about what had happened to their loved ones. I listened to moms who had said that their 14-year-old had been shot unintentionally by a friend. I listened to a sailor who had returned to Virginia Beach on leave and was just shot and killed and paralyzed from a basically random act of gun violence, the everyday stories. But then in 2010, my own son used a gun that he had bought for self-protection to take his own life. And that just sort of gave me the extra oomph to get back involved to stop this from happening to other people. And so that's my reason for keeping going. But truthfully, I've had many years of being involved in this movement before it hit so close to home for me. So, and then I don't know if you're also asking at the same time, what moms demand action.
Please go ahead and share.
Okay, so thank you, Simi. So we moms, and you don't have to be a mother in order to be involved in moms. We have a lot of men, we have women who are not mothers, we have teenagers, we even have a little, it's not little, it's a students demand action organization. And, it has turned into the leading cause of death of children and teens, which is extremely heartbreaking. And so for us, we are a group that has we have close to 10 million supporters, which probably doesn't surprise you considering how much, you've gotten from your viewers who are saying, we have to do this. So we have people who are ready to take action. I run my own local group here in the suburbs of Houston, and mass shootings are pretty horrific, frightening. A lot of our moms have gotten involved after the school shootings, but they don't really tell the full story of gun violence. So it's a very complex issue, and it impacts everybody. You can be a mom sitting here, you can be, but it doesn't take a holiday, and it claims over 110 people a day, and then 200 more are shot and wounded. So those people are living with it every day, and then the families of all those impacted. So it's got a very large rippling effect. We lose over 3,600 people in Texas every year by guns, and we have the 19th highest rate of gun deaths. And considering that we're pretty spread out with a few cities, it's huge. 60%, so 2/3, like my son, 2/3 of the gun deaths are suicides. And excuse me, I'll talk more about that later, but that's where we get into some of the safe storage issues that we talk about, is the gun suicides. And it costs gun violence in Texas. If you just want to look at it purely economic, that's why it should really cross, both sides of the aisle. It costs us $24 billion a year just here in Texas. So that is an astounding amount. But Moms Demand Action, we're very strategic. We're under the umbrella organization of Everytown for Gun Safety. And so it helps us do a lot of research on what kinds of things work. And we kind of use a multifaceted approach to addressing gun violence. We have federal action, we have state legislative action, we do local government advocacy, we engage with partners at the local level, people who are doing violence interruption. So, groups who work already right in their community. We work with on school safety. We try to go out and educate the public, and we also work on elections. I mean, we're going to be burning a lot of shoe leather this year. And then we're very strategic. We build a very diverse movement. We really try to advance equity and inclusion in our movement, and so that everybody feels like they have a little piece of the power. And we have that single mission. Our single mission is to prevent gun violence, and we're all volunteers for these 2022 elections. It's all going to be volunteer led, and our state legislative work. We were just up in Austin last week with a bunch of us. It's all volunteer led. And then we have the Be Smart campaign, which is the safe storage that, would have helped my son. And then we engage with our partners. So that's what we do. And we're just, we have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for the people who are involved in this issue who are not survivors, but we engage our survivors as well. And so that's who we are. We have groups I keep saying that's who we are, and then I think of something else. We have we have chapters everywhere. So I'm in suburban Houston, but we have chapters all over Bexar County, Gillespie County, Hayes, Coleman County, out in El Paso, Dallas. We're I mean, I just know all these women from and men from all over the state, and we have trainings on how to, like I'm doing now, speaking to the media, how to talk to your legislator, how to re-engage volunteers. And so that's it. And at the very, after we're all done talking about legislation and the nitty gritty, I'll tell people how they can get more involved with their local Moms Demand Action chapter.
Absolutely. I would love to hear more about that. And there's a lot to unpack in what you said. But one thing, of course, that I want to say is I'm sorry about your personal experience with gun violence.
Thank you so much. His name was Kelsey.
Kelsey, I can see from the picture behind you that he looks like a charming young man.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, he really he was just a total character. He was really, we have a lot of stories about him, and so I appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you also spoke to the first question that I wanted to tackle, which is what is the status of gun violence in America today? You talked to some of the stats that, honestly, for me as a lay person that just hears about it in the news, it's numbing. The number of deaths, the number of people that are injured, the amount of money that you highlighted. That's the first time that I've heard that figure in only the state of Texas, let alone the country. I want to actually play something that will, I think, add to what you've already spoken to, which summarizes how many people I know feel about gun violence, in particular mass shootings. And I would love to hear how you respond. This piece is from the Economist podcast, Checks and Balance. It's one of my favorite podcasts. Desk, chair, whiteboard, backpack. The basic trappings of schools vary hardly at all from one country to another. In only one country, however, is the question asked if these familiar items of childhood can be made bulletproof. In only one country are curved walls being designed in schools to disrupt line of sight of an attacker. In only one country does the first day of school routinely involve learning where to hide, while learning that hiding may not be enough. 19 children and 2 teachers were shot dead in an elementary school last month. This only happens in America. The reason this happens is simple. It's because Americans have more guns. The horror at Uvalde, Texas shows American exceptionalism at its worst, but part of the tragedy itself is that it is not exceptional. In the 10 years since the massacre at Sandy Hook, killing 26, there have been more than 900 other shootings in schools across the country. And this latest atrocity happened just days after 10 people were murdered in a supermarket in Buffalo due to the color of their skin. Jane, your thoughts on this piece, and would you like to add more regarding the status of gun violence in America?
Well, I think that Economist piece is spot on. It's heart-wrenching to hear those again. We're getting numb to some of these events, because if we had a vigil just a few months ago, just earlier this month, for our National Wear Orange, which is honoring gun survivors. And there are far too many names to read out. So the ones that we know, like the person there mentioned Buffalo, which was already almost forgotten by the time that we got to Uvalde. And the Uvalde thing will be forgotten by the time that we have the next one. And only in this country, they said that, only in this country do people worry about making a backpack bulletproof. We can't walk around in bulletproof head to toe. And in other countries, they don't do that. We have been held hostage to the gun lobby and its guns everywhere all the time. It makes us safer somehow, which is just so not the case here. We have a gun violence crisis, and it's on the rise in every community. You're 26 times more likely here in the US than other developed nations. I mean, everyone's, oh, this is the best country. Well, maybe if you don't want to be shot. Women here are in extreme danger, 28 times more likely to be killed by an intimate partner here, 28 times more likely to be killed, period. But 70 women are shot by their intimate partner every month in this country. So it's Black women are 10 times more likely. The cause of death, I said that the cause of death for children and teens is number one is gun violence, but it's long been that for Black and brown people. So this is not nothing new for them. So, they're absolutely right. And so what we can't do is give up. And I think, the world was watching with what happened. This didn't make news just here. It makes it worldwide. And, you can, if you're ever in another country, when something happens here, people around the world just shake their head. What the heck is going on with you guys? So, luckily for us, I shouldn't say luckily, because it was a lot of hard work. The Congress has passed and Biden has signed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So that is a big leap forward. It's the first leap forwards we've taken in 26 years. Back when I was living in DC, that was the last time that we enacted meaningful gun legislation with the waiting period and the assault weapons ban. And the assault weapons ban was allowed to lapse. So this one, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, it establishes an enhanced background check process for buyers who are under the age of 21, only because that period from 18 to 21 is extremely dangerous. For most homicides between 18 and 21 is a huge, what is the statistic? It will come around in my brain here again. But 18 to 21-year-old males commit homicides at a rate far greater. And I think that's just a matter of brain maturity. So if they didn't have this access to deadly weapons, by the time they get a little further on, they've realized, there's consequences to this. And they've gotten out of some of those changes that are going through that, need to happen here. But this one, pardon me while I just take a sip of water. The Bipartisan Safer Community Act that provides federal funding to implement state red flag laws. So we're hoping that our state miraculously avails themselves of those. It's not likely, as Governor Abbott doesn't like to take federal funding for Medicaid. He probably will not be thinking that he wants to take this federal funding, this free money, to help us with red flag. And for those listeners who don't know what a red flag law is, it's also sometimes called an extreme risk protective order. And that just allows a person who, if they have somebody that they think is in crisis and they know has one weapon or maybe many, they can petition a judge to temporarily remove those firearms from that individual. And it's only after due process, it's only after a judge reviews it. But there have many times been people who've said there was a warning, there was domestic violence threats, there was even domestic violence, period. And then, it escalates to something where it turns into a mass shooting. So almost all of those mass shooters had somebody who knew that it was a danger, and they had some prior either run-in with law enforcement or a prior action where if people were allowed to temporarily at least remove those guns from the home. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act also disarms domestic abusers by addressing what's called the dating partner loophole. So that's really good, because it used to just be that you had to be either married or have children with them. But women are in grave danger of of their significant others. And then it also funds, this is really key, it does fund community violence intervention programs. And we know that those things work. These are people who really know what's happening in my community and how can we fix it? How can we be there and show up for these people and that kind of stuff in their communities. So, right now the background check is a 3-day, well, it's actually an instant checks right now, but under this, it will allow for those 18 to 21-year-olds, it requires checking in with state and local law enforcement and see, is there something else that we need to check into this person for? And then, the $750 million that's going to be going out as possible money for the state red flag laws. And that's going to unlock that funding stream, right? Like states can't really do that on their own in this, although some states have. In states where we've seen this, the drop in homicides is startling. And in states that loosen their gun laws and have the rise in homicides are resultant. So, on everystat.org, people can find out, there's many people out there that do research on this issue, and you can find the cause and effect. We just have to make sure that lawmakers know that we're listening to that. And then I talked about the domestic abusers, and that would do that. And then also it kind of clarifies who has to run a background check, which is huge, because right now we have people who can be in the business of selling it to you at a gun show, but they're not a federally licensed firearm dealer, or maybe in the parking lot. People can just Craigslist it and walk up to a parking lot. And so it clarifies that these people are going to have to run background checks on it. And then also, it's the first time there's going to be a federal law against interstate gun trafficking and straw purchasing. So what we see a lot of times is they point to Chicago. Oh, Chicago has such bad gun violence, but they have strong gun laws. Well, those guns are flowing from states right next door, say Indiana and Missouri. They're coming right across into Illinois, and then up 95 from other states right up on up into New York. So, and then the $250 million for the community violence intervention, that's going to be huge. Investing in mental health, that's not a be all and all. Folks suffering from mental illness are more likely to be the victims of gun violence. So it's not particularly a mental illness thing, it's mental health. So, expanding it for children and families, school-based mental health and supportive services. There's no downside to that, right? So there's no problem in that. And then there's also evidence-based school violence prevention efforts that are in there. So we've seen that with those tragic shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo, that, we've shown up. This is how this got passed, right? We showed up, we shut down the switchboard. We called every US senator to say, people have had enough, right? They've had enough. And this is why, I think they didn't just decide to do this on their own, say, oh, gee, maybe we should do something finally after 26 years. No, it's the red shirts showing up, calling, having rallies, demanding that they pay attention to this. So that is the, right now, that's the federal level. And, we're still working, we're still working here in Texas, and to keep going on this. Is it just, there's a lot to be done.
Absolutely. But you touched on so much across, especially the federal level, especially with the legislation that was recently passed. I wonder if we can stay on that topic, especially with the Supreme Court ruling that recently came in that, if I remember correctly, judged that a New York state law was unconstitutional regarding carrying handguns. Could you speak to that, as well as some other things you've seen legislation-wise that have happened in states in the U.S. at the state level and local levels.
Sure. So, plain and simple, that decision was just wrong. It's dangerous, and it won't stop us. It was very a very narrow interpretation of that New York law, so that it said that they couldn't regulate where somebody can carry things, which is absolutely ridiculous. But it won't stop us fighting. It won't stop us, and it's out of step. I mean, that is completely out of step. That decision is completely out of step with what's happening. It has real world life and death implications, right? Like you can sit up there in the Supreme Court and say this, but this will impact people across, not just across the state of New York, but across the country. It's limited to just that constitutionality of one aspect. And it has sort of implications for just maybe a little handful of other states, but it doesn't change the majority of the concealed carry laws across the country. And it still allows for public carry laws on who can carry and where. So, it does allow for that. Unfortunately, here in Texas, we have permitless carry. So people can carry wherever they want without this. So it didn't, sadly, in a way, it didn't affect us. We have to kind of look at it though, against the backdrop of the action that the Congress took, the bipartisan Safer Communities. So that is really what the will of the country is. So even though the Supreme Court turned its back on the American people and they turned their back on law enforcement, they turned their back on communities of color, particularly, and it turned its back on the safest states that have already enacted what they thought and knew would help the citizens of their states. So I think that they sided with the gun extremists. They risked their credibility. They're out of touch. I mean, it's just, so we're just drawing the line at that, like that, this lawless, gun for all, everybody can pack something. Our you just have a regular argument, and then it escalates into something. They just had one where somebody was it was something like a chicken dispute, and the guy was shot dead. So they really should realize that this was really wrong and dangerous. But they've ignored decades, centuries really, of constitutional principles. I mean, it's just been, they just really threw that out. They've time and time and time again, when I was in DC, time and time again, this would come up, and they voted to uphold key gun safety measures. So this one is just sort of out of the blue. But we're still working with lawmakers. We're still working them to keeping guns out of sensitive places. And, we're ready. We have 10 million supporters. We are ready for this. We're not going to get discouraged. The NRAs, it's going to take a lot more than just one little court decision for them to win the war on public safety. I just think that, when the Congress just passed this big legislation things, we're going to be turning this into votes. We're going to be turning this outrage into action, like you're hearing from your listeners. And, I really can't say enough about the others. I don't go into other issues. We are this for, Moms Demand Action is single issue focused, but I think it's just completely out of touch. We were in Austin, talking with legislators, and they're willing to speak with us. So they're not like going, oh, well, Supreme Court, never mind, can't do any of that. We're fighting for families and victims. And the legislators, even though they don't always vote with us, we go in and they do listen. We have advocacy days and stuff like that. So yeah, they know that this is an issue that people are going to start voting on. It used to just be the gun lobby extremists that would do that, and they would spread their disinformation, their fear. But now I think the legislators are realizing that common sense gun laws can be an issue that people vote on.
Thanks for that. I want to continue on the Second Amendment rights advocates and their opinions. I read, in my opinion, a compelling article from Breitbart, the news media website and organization. I'm going to go ahead and read that, and I would love to hear your thoughts in response to this piece. I'm taking excerpts from the opinion piece.
Okay.
By now, we're all familiar with the reflexive response of the political left and their allies in the mass media. They want to restrict the rights of law-abiding citizens to possess and use firearms. The Uvalde shooter passed a background check to obtain his rifle. Why would anyone suppose that a more rigorous background check would turn up anything? Most young, twisted school shooters are not career criminals and don't have significant records of any kind. Two political scientists from the University of Missouri analyzed the data on every mass shooting in the US between 1980 and 2020. They concluded that background check requirements did nothing to reduce the number of deaths in mass shootings. Time magazine ran its own study in 2019 and concluded that it was difficult to point to cases where more expansive background checks would have saved lives, end quote. Gun control activists insist that arming teachers won't work, but 20 states or portions thereof allow teachers and staff to carry concealed weapons in school. The Crime Prevention Research Center reports, start quote, since the year 2000, there has yet to be a single case of someone being wounded or killed from a shooting, let alone a mass public shooting between 6 a.m. and midnight at a school that lets teachers carry guns, end quote. Not one. Armed citizens save lives, many more than you might think. We hear about mass shootings, but not about the dozens of instances in which armed citizens either prevented the shooter from beginning his rampage or saved many lives by cutting it short. An instructive example occurred only a day after the Uvalde tragedy. In Charleston, West Virginia, dozens of people were attending an outdoor birthday/graduation party when a man drove up and began shooting into the crowd. A courageous woman in the attendance drew a pistol and shot and killed the shooter. Police spokesman Tony Hazlett said, instead of running from the threat, she engaged with the threat and saved several lives. This heroic action received a tiny fraction of the coverage of the Uvalde shooting. Why? Precisely because no mass shooting occurred. It was prevented. Incidentally, the man who opened fire was a convicted felon, meaning that by law, he could not own a gun. This fact underscores a fundamental point. Gun laws don't stop criminals because by definition, criminals are in the business of breaking the law. What is your response to this piece, and how else have you seen proponents of the Second Amendment offer their side of the story?
Okay, so this is going to sound very crass, but that's just a broken record. It is a broken record. I've heard that since I've been working on this movement since 1984. And it's like, oh no, it's only a good guy with a gun that stops the bad guy with a gun, which is completely false. So they have one person that they can pull out who happened to stop this person. What we hear from law enforcement is that, and we know from the research, is that more guns don't make us safer, or we would already be the safest country in the world. We have 300 million people and we have 120 guns per every 100 person. So it seems odd to me that more guns make us safer. So, and then they talk about arming teachers. No teachers I've ever talked to think that that is a great idea. So you have a classroom full of children, and now they have to be teacher, babysitter. They also have to be armed, and they have to be potentially able to shepherd all their children safely and also do something that law enforcement is often unable to do, which is to stop an armed shooter with an AR-15. So they're supposed to, they have to safely store that weapon. You can't have kindergartners having access to a loaded gun, or even high schoolers having access to a loaded gun. And then yet they have to be able to be extraordinarily trained. Now, if there are some places where the school feels like this is their only option, in Texas, there are programs that allow them to do that, but what teachers are leaving in droves. Teachers are retiring early. Teachers are not entering the field. Teachers are giving up because they go into the business of teaching to teach. Can you imagine at your job, they say, oh, you have to be the receptionist, but you also have to be a trained marksman too, because, we're not going to prevent this shooting from happening. We're going to arm everybody. We're not going to have anybody go through a background check, which is not true that they don't work. They stop prohibited purchasers all the time. So that is, honestly, I really just think that we need to ask them to come on here and talk about the number of people that they see. The survivors, the victims and survivors of gun violence speak louder, I think, than all of their talking points. And, right now our eyes are on Governor Abbott. He's chosen to call for these meaningless sort of do nothing special committees again. The number of times that we have had to go and sit through 14, 15, 16 hours of hearings with, on gun safety, and he comes up with absolutely nothing. He actually said, in the wake of one of the deadliest school shootings in the history of our country, he got up in front of Texans and he said, could have been worse. That, to me, is not leadership. Leadership is trying to think of real solutions. That's just cowardice. They're having these tone deaf discussions about maybe we can have only one single entrance, which most of the schools actually do, and they're double, and you have to be buzzed in and all that. Maybe we can make the walls super high. Never mind. It's completely tone deaf, and it's really just an extremist position. I think really just try to find solutions, and I don't think the gun extremists are trying to find any solution to this. I think they're just wasting our time and resources, honestly. And we're going to hold our lawmakers accountable about that. I've got lots of ideas of stuff that they could do.
On that point, that's perfect segue. What is the roadmap to enact sensible gun safety laws? How can the average American get involved to work with organizations like Moms Demand Action, among other organizations, in order to enact change?
Well, there's many ways, and there's always a spot for everybody. There's just whatever your interest is. There's always a spot for everybody. One of our number one priorities is repealing the permitless carry that was enacted, because that was very dangerous, allowing guns everywhere. And we've been through all of the rest of the legislation, but the ways that people can get involved are really numerous. I would say just sort of get yourself informed. Go on to everytownresearch.org, go on to momsdemandaction.org, look up an event. You can text ACT, the word ACT in all caps, to 64433. There's many ways to talk to your teachers, see what they want, see if you can bring the safe firearm storage from Be Smart into your PTO or PTA, or take it to your Rotary Club, take it to your fraternity or sorority, take it to wherever you go and hang out. It's a short little presentation on safe firearm storage, and we know that saves lives. Come to some of our events. We have them all over the country. We have plenty here in Texas, and you can find them on the Mom's website, momsdemandaction.org. And I feel like there's plenty of people who want to get involved, and sometimes we fail to remember that some people have not been as politically active as some of us have been. So we can start off with just sort of educating you on who represents you. How do we talk to legislators? How do we listen to other community partners who are working on this issue? How can we go and support them? You know, is there a community justice action fund near you? Is there a domestic violence group near you that just needs help? Go and do that, right? You don't even have to come with us in our red shirts. We're partnering with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. You know, work with them on raising suicide prevention awareness, yes. And many other groups that are out there working. Volunteering at a local food bank, you know, making people less food insecure, getting, you know, lowering their stress levels can really help. Volunteering in the schools, you know, volunteer with some of that. So, you know, if people want to get involved in this issue, you know, there's also other organizations that work in the gun violence prevention movement. I happen to like this one because I think we do, you know, we do the work on the ground. And once they text ACT to 64433, we reach out, we get them plugged into their local group wherever they are, and then we're off and running.
That's awesome. We've covered so much in this short conversation regarding the status of where we are with gun violence in America, legislation that has passed, judicial rulings, different viewpoints, as well as this roadmap that you just laid out for us. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to do a quick plug-in. So please, the floor is yours, Jane.
Well, I just want to thank you and your listeners so much for having me on here. It's very meaningful for me, especially in the loss of my son, but on behalf of all of the survivors of gun violence that I know personally and have heard of over the years. I really appreciate you taking the time to have me on behalf of this organization. And again, if somebody wants to join up, I would say look up your local Moms Demand Action chapter. You can go right onto the website that says find an event and plug in your zip code. Sometimes if your zip isn't on there, you know, if the group is too far away, reach out and tell me you want to start a local group. We are expanding all the ways. We just had a march that we partnered with the March for Our Lives, and people came down from rural counties, from Polk County, from Grimes County. I mean, they were coming from all over to come into Montgomery County to say, hey, how can I start local groups? So if that's you, we are more than happy to find you. We have a Facebook page. You can always, when you text to ACT to 64433, and you know, they reach back out, don't stop until you get somebody who says, yes, I will help mentor you. People can reach out to me. I'm easily found on Facebook and through Moms Demand Action. And, you know, I will help anybody start up a local group. We've got them all over. I don't know if your listeners are everywhere. We've got them all over Texas and all over the city of Houston as well. So that was a long plug.
I appreciate it. Your story, your information, your personal experience, and your involvement in Moms Demand Action have added so much to the conversation here, and it's inspiring. And your spirit is infectious. I feel like I need to continue working even harder towards sensible and bipartisan work that we're doing. Thank you so much for coming on, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you, Simmy. I really applaud what you're doing.
Thank you, Jane. And to our listeners, thank you for coming on for one more episode of the March for Unity, Civility, and Political Engagement. We hope you have enjoyed it. Just as there was inspiration from a viewer regarding this episode and the content thereof, please offer feedback, please offer suggestions. I'm all ears. Until next time, be safe, and I will see you on YouTube, Facebook, on a podcast near you soon. Thank you and bye.